Platforms Market Inquiry. This morning we have the Institute for Technology and Network Economics, we have Independent Media and Isolezwe, and then we have the Association of Independent Publishers. We will be releasing on our webpage the schedule for next week and the week after, the remaining sessions of the hearings. We're only going to sit Monday to Wednesday next week. And in those days, we'll hear from Columbia University's Director of Technology, Media and Communications, Media Monitoring Africa, the National Association of Broadcasters, SAVA SABC, Google AdTech, eMedia and YFM, the Omicron Media Group, RTB House, also Media Group, and Prime Media. This spillover into the week of the 25th, which should just involve the 25th, 26th, and 27th, we'll hear from OpenAI, YouTube, and Meta. The panel certainly welcomes the participation in the remaining part of the hearings of some of the largest global platforms and AI companies, and their willingness to provide the transparency and accountability to the media and the public of South Africa that is required. TikTok is not on the schedule as it has refused to participate in the hearings. TikTok, as with X, is advised by ENS. TikTok's reason is that they are irrelevant to the inquiry as they are an entertainment platform. However, this is something that is subject to discussion and debate, and that is why we wanted to bring them here. But TikTok is the fastest growing platform globally and in South Africa. In South Africa, it has over 20 million subscribers, and it's also evolving as its content changes and its participation changes. We heard from the Reuters Institute this week that for South Africa, TikTok already represents, 22% of users on TikTok say they go there for the news, up 7% from the previous year. And that shows the dynamic of a growing platform. They also demonstrate that 38% of 18 to 24-year-olds go to TikTok for news, and that is continuing to grow while Facebook is declining. And while some of that may not be from the mainstream media, a third of those 33% was. The Reuters Institute finding is also supported by a separate survey in the UK, where it was found, in fact, that twice as many 18 to 24-year-olds go to TikTok for news rather than the BBC. So this reflects what is happening in other markets and what may happen in South Africa too. The panel certainly doesn't accept the reasons for not appearing. It denies the public and the media the transparency and accountability that they deserve. And we hope that TikTok will change their mind on this. But moving to today's session, we have Professor Potgieter from the Institute for Technology and Network Economics. Professor, I don't know if you're online. I know we battled to get you online earlier.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Welcome.
Are you able to hear me, Professor Hodge?
Yes, and you can call us James and Paula. Petrus.
Likewise, I'm Petrus.
Thank you, Petrus. Apologies, we had that challenge. I believe you've got opening remarks and opening remarks, and then we may have questions for you after that.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. I unfortunately didn't realize that I should have sent my presentation earlier. So I'm just going to talk about our submission. So this is joint work with Bronwyn Howell of Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. And I'm also attached to the Department of Decision Sciences at UNISA. We also work through the Institute for Technology and Network Economics. Both of us have extensive experience in studying telecommunications economics and regulations. We are both board members of the International Telecommunications Society, regularly speak at the Telecommunications Policy Research Conference in Washington, where I'm also on the program committee, and have published jointly and separately on issues related to telecommunications and the media industry. The presentation reflects our personal opinions, of course, and not those of any employer. So the questions that we addressed was, first of all, the question, has the business model of digital platforms played a role in exacerbating a growing mistrust by the public in the media? So the public perception of a decline in trust is rather well documented by many academic studies that show that there has been a parallel decline in trust and the rise of digital media. These studies are not unanimous in whether there is causation in this. And an interesting question would be whether both are caused by external factors rather than the one caused by the other. And indeed, it has been well documented that traditional media has also been involved in the spreading of fake news and things like that. I would say that that is fairly normal. And a stunning example this month was the photoshopped picture of the British royal family, where we had that picture appearing on the front page of British print newspapers, even though it was fairly easy to check that it's a fake. For a start, the state of the tree and the grass in the background are certainly not what one would expect in the UK in the month of March. So I should say, first of all, that the background is I have attended or watched several speakers in these hearings, and I have a great deal of appreciation for what journalists do, especially in South Africa. I was shocked by some of the revelations by the gentleman from News 24 about the harassment, especially of female journalists. That's really, really bad. So we have a great appreciation for the role of the press. So to move on to the further questions, so the decline in trust is parallel, but not necessarily causative. The next question is, has the business model of digital platforms played a role? Sorry, that's the same question. Have efforts by platforms to root out misinformation and disinformation been sufficient to address the problem? So in this regard, we have looked quite extensively at the so-called Christchurch call, which was initiated by former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern after the shocking shootings at the Christchurch Mosque. And we looked at the governance structures at Facebook specifically, and we have come to the conclusion that actually some of the platforms like Facebook actually do a lot to counter dis and misinformation. And this is done in a way that involves quite a lot of well-constructed governance in the oversight bodies that do this. Unfortunately, as some of the speakers have also pointed out, there is a lot of false and misleading advertising. Many of us have seen the fake videos of SABC News anchor Bongiwe Zwane promoting completely fake money-making schemes. Quite confusingly, many of this false and misleading advertising also appears on mainstream newspaper websites because they come in through the digital platform feeds. So the issue of misleading and scam advertising is real, but this is true also for many other communication platforms, not the least of which is SMS. So this is a problem of the modern communication era. A good question would be, however, why consumers appear to trust the digital media more for getting information and entertainment. And one of the explanations could be that because the algorithms employed by these platforms actually do a better job, in fact, a much better job of curating items of interest in the conventional media for consumers, and they do a better job than the newspaper publishers themselves. So that is something to keep in mind. I also want to mention that consumers have easy access to fact-checking websites such as Snopes and Africa Check. There are websites like Ground News, the URL is ground.news, where consumers can find news stories from traditional media analyzed in detail according to provenance and possible ideological bias. As an aside, we also discussed in some of the previous sessions the question of AI-generated comment. We have a recent conference paper on the problem of AI-generated content, which is a real societal problem, but we do not see it as a problem that is germane to this inquiry necessarily. So since AI is probably not representing itself, I would like to add that many of the sort of bad things that is generated through AI text engines and that you find published on quote unquote news websites involve mistakes and miscomprehensions that one can unfortunately also quite often find in the traditional media. This is because of my background in mathematics. I'm very sensitive to this, and these are simply mistakes. A question in the call for comment that we'd like to address is what has the impact of growing public distrust on the business models of credible media organizations subject to self-regulatory bodies and their ability to compete for attention both on online platforms and more broadly be. This has, of course, been great, but we would like to propose that this should not be of a concern. The protection of old or existing models should really not be the business of the state or its agencies. And there are incidentally notable titles in the old media that have successfully transitioned into the digital era. One of them is the Financial Times. One could also look at Forbes magazine and its extensive online presence. So some of the traditional media have managed, and we would say that it is rather an issue of finding the correct business model, which we appreciate is difficult, but this is a problem for private enterprise and not for regulators or the state. Finally, I would like to just address the very important question of what impact does this have on the constitutional rights, including the rights of the child and the role of media in a democracy. Now, neither one of us is a lawyer, but we have read the South African Constitution, and the Constitution makes the following statement about freedom of expression. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, which includes A, freedom of the press and other media, and it goes up to D. So these are includes, but they are not an exhaustive list of includes. The Constitution says that freedom of expression applies to freedom of the press and media, but it actually applies to everything else. These are merely examples. So we do not think the fact that the traditional press is referred to in the Constitution is of specific import, other than clearly expressing the intent of the framers of the Constitution that the expression of freedom of expression is a very strong right, and it is a right that applies in many areas. This was an important example at the time. So the clause on freedom of expression in the Constitution continues to say that the right of freedom of expression does not extend to A, propaganda for war, B, incitement of imminent violence, and C, advocacy of hatred and things like that. And it stops. So there is a list of 3 exclusions from the freedom of expression in our Constitution, and mis and disinformation is not one of the exclusions. So the Constitution is very clear that freedom of expression is absolute and includes certain things and excludes an enumerated list of things. So it's very hard for me to see how one can at all limit the freedom of expression by referring to things such as misinformation and disinformation, regardless of how serious these things can be. Now, in closing, I would like to say that we acknowledge that traditional media is under pressure from new digital media worldwide. Indeed, not only that, but as I think it was the gentleman from MoneyWeb quite nicely explained that there are also new opportunities in digital media. And we see this in many countries, including New Zealand, where specialized news websites have been enabled by the widespread use of the internet. And there are many internet-only publishers of news that are quite successful. These platforms, of course, use the big digital platforms for advertising and distribution. And one of the reasons why that is unavoidable is because the big digital platforms have actually worked out quite well how to monetize content. And that is why they are so large, because they know how to do it. As further background, I have been co-author of 2 chapters in a book called New Concepts for Media Diversity, A View from South Africa, edited by Julie Reed of UNISA. And we looked at audience data on media consumption and then analyzed the audience data with respect to titles as well as ownership. And the big picture is that all of the media in South Africa have historically been very concentrated, especially newspapers. If you look by ownership, it's a highly concentrated market by any measure that you choose, HHI, full firm concentration ratio, or whatever. So that is really a thing. And when it comes to the platforms, we acknowledge that online platforms, or some people say big tech, are highly concentrated. We believe that this might be the result of economies of scale and or network effects. And by economies of scale, I include the difficulty of developing appropriate software to distribute content, which is a real issue. We see that in the problems that MultiChoice had with its initial Showmax app, where it just recently had to go to NBC and get some new software for distributing its content. It's also the case that with digital platforms, dominance can easily just disappear. I believe that AI will soon reduce the dominance of the prominent search engines to a very great extent. And to look at history, we can just consider what happened to Internet Explorer. It was a terribly dominant in the browser market, but that dominance simply disappeared very quickly. So I believe that every effort to address that kind of dominance was essentially fruitless because the technology and the applications changed so quickly. There are many other issues around big tech and online platforms, one of which is copyright. And this is tangentially relevant for this inquiry because the traditional right of first sale has been lost through the digitization of content. So it used to be the case that parallel markets in secondhand books, records, DVDs, CDs, etc., constrained the rather artificial rights accorded by copyright law to copyright holders. That has disappeared, and that has been a factor in the rise of platforms, especially content platforms. We believe it's something to be addressed, but probably not in this forum. And with that, I conclude. I think I have used exactly 15 minutes. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity to comment.
No, thank you, Petrus. And I mean, what you've highlighted is it is a complex inquiry. These are complex issues, and there's a lot of nuance, certainly, within many of these topics. I think it would be interesting for us to get some of your research, especially around the AI-generated content and some of the media consumption and audience data, also to see the techniques that can be used to assess these things. I think that would be of interest to us. One question we do have, and unfortunately we've not got much time because we have independent Isolezwe logging in, but you said that AI is likely to disrupt the search space, and maybe you can just unpack that a little bit for us, please.
Well, the thing is, instead of using Bing or Google search, you can just use an appropriate AI tool to ask a question and get a single answer. And that removes the opportunity which the search engine providers have of serving you with advertising content. So it bypasses that search engine application actually in favor of a single answer. And it could be that many of the good AI engines are simply going to be paid. So you will pay a subscription amount, and then they will have monetized the use of the AI engine for search. And then it's goodbye Bing and Google and Yahoo and whatever still exists. I do that now a lot. So especially on technical issues, if I want to know how to do something on my computer in software or in coding, I just ask ChatGPT how to do it instead of paging through many pages of Google search results.
And I think that is interesting, and maybe just to flag that we do in fact have OpenAI coming in the week of the 25th, and these are some of the questions we've been asking both Google and Microsoft earlier in the week. And I think what it will be interesting is to see how it affects different types of queries, because, you know, certainly their SGE or Bing Copilot seems to work with the search index and ranking infrastructure in order to provide answers. So I think it is, you're right, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but certainly I think we'll try to get into more depth with that with OpenAI as well, as we have them coming.
Thank you. That should be very interesting. And what I'll do is forward you some of our papers via Nolutando, I suppose.
Yeah, and we would appreciate that. And I think, as you say, there's AI-generated content is going to get difficult. Your example of last week and the picture highlights, I think, the challenges that are going to be faced for authentication in real time with a lot of this content. So we look forward to reading your paper on AI-generated content. And I also want to thank you for making the time to make submissions, the time to come and present, and apologies, we had a technical issue that delayed the start, and hope you'll continue to follow this inquiry.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Paula. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Beatrice. I think we are now moving to Independent and Isolezwe. Just make sure they are joining virtually, and I'll just wait for confirmation that they are online. welcome back. It seems today we're having a few technical issues just getting people into the meeting. We now welcome independent media and one of the newspapers in their stable, Isolezwe, the largest isiZulu paper, probably African language paper in the country. From independent media, I believe we have Mohammed Hussein, the acting CEO of independent media, Vyasan Subramoni, the CEO of Independent Online, Melanie Peters, the managing editor of Independent, supported also by Sandy Nordir of Advertising and Marketing. And then on a separate feed, we've got Tulani Mbata, the editor of Isolezwe. So welcome to independent media. Thank you for making the time to come and participate in the hearing.
Commissioner Hodge, you're speaking to Vyasan Subramani. I have the pleasure of leading our submission today, and to greetings to panel member Frey. Thank you for affording us this opportunity.
Thank you, and I believe you have a presentation, so I think we'll start with that. We won't interrupt you while you're giving your presentation, then we'll have questions afterwards. And please call us James and Paula, and we'll do the same on your side if that's okay.
Thank you, James. I'll keep that in mind. So, James, just to kick off, I'd like to just quickly reintroduce our team. It's made up of Mohammed Hussein, as you mentioned, the acting Chief Executive Officer of Independent Media, Mr. Tulani Mbata, the editor of Isolezwe, myself, Vyasan Subramani, the Chief Executive Officer at IOL, and the Managing Editor for Independent Media, Melanie Peters. James and Paula, our submission today will be broken down into three sections comprising independent media, Isolezwe, and IOL. And if you would allow me, just before handing over to Mr. Hussein, I'd like to provide a short overview before we actually get into our formal presentation, if that's okay, James.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Fantastic. As a proudly South African brand and a transformed media organization with a rich history spanning over a century, we have borne witness to the transformative journey of our nation. From the dark days of apartheid to the emergence of democracy, independent media has played a pivotal role in shaping South Africa. Our commitment to informing, educating, and guiding millions of South Africans spanning diverse languages and cultures remains unwavering. The purpose of our presence here today, James and Paula, is to emphasize the imperative need to safeguard and preserve crucial assets, platforms, and a craft that significantly contributes to upholding our democracy. However, our existence faces a formidable threat as large technology corporations persist in tendencies that are anti-competitive and that have had a devastating impact on the news, media, and journalism sectors. Our submission here today extends beyond self-preservation. It's a call to protect the essence of democracy and freedom of expression, and to ensure that the voice we provide through our journalism and platforms is not stifled. With that brief overview, James and Paula, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Mohammed Hussein, the CEO of Independent Media, and we can start with the formal presentation. Thank you.
You can just go over that.
Next slide, please.
Thank you, Vyasan, and thank you, James and Paula, for affording Independent Media the time to tell a little bit about our story. So our story will be based on three fundamental headings: the history, the impact, and future. Is it moving to the next one?
Yes.
Right, so from independent media and the overall media aspect, we need to grasp what that is regarding the rise of big tech. We have seen across the globe the demise of many renowned publications, and through this process, we are hoping that we can stop the demise in South Africa. So here are our titles. We have up to 18 titles across print and digital platforms, including some hybrid vernacular titles and vernacular titles, including The Voice and Isolezwe. As you can see, our titles span generations, with our oldest title, let's go up.
Just one back.
Before. As we can see, our title spans generations, with our oldest title, The Mercury, started in 1852, with our youngest title being The Voice in 2005. Seeing the legacy of the titles we have carried, the history of South Africa in our archives, we are part of history. Importantly, we need to sit back and understand what this history means. Our titles tell and are still telling the story of South Africa. Independent media is part of history, and we hope it will still be part of the future. To add, our titles and media organize a national spread and regional spread as well. This includes the main letters of KZN, Gauteng, and Cape Town. Recently, independent media has been transformed, now employing a majority of our employees from previously disadvantaged backgrounds. So that concludes a bit of our history. So we can go now to the impact of how big tech has impacted independent media. Much has been said by our fellow colleagues in the media environment about this issue in previous presentations. However, I do believe we are all united on a common goal of quality journalism that speaks to our fellow South Africans. We speak in agreement that we're now in a position that we have to buy out and beg from the same big tech masters who created our dependency. For independent and the industry at large, the big tech model was built on our content. This move happened with stealth and without a just transition. This impact on the numbers can be seen below. There has been a significant decline in revenue. Our employee numbers has significantly declined over the years, and our circulation has declined, which is public knowledge. So this obviously shows the impact of this downward spiral on graphs. So this is for easy reference for the viewers and for the commission. And then I go on to the next slide. So this trend seen in these graphs are consistent in that the media houses across the globe are always in a cost-cutting position whereby restructures and retrenchment is the norm. Fighting for our survival is our daily job, resulting in all creating a dangerous descent of news being served up by AI and bots. Big tech essentially controlling the narrative. Essentially, I have to say, does enough cash mean a good outcome? In our case, it's independent media are struggling with potential press freedom and diversity of opinion are cornerstones of our hard-fought democracy. So as I conclude from my side is, are we looking at the future without quality and verified journalism? So that ends my presentation on independent media. So thank you, Paul and James and Paul, for giving me the opportunity to present a bit of our story. From here, we will be discussing a proud title of ours and a proud title of South Africa, in my opinion, our only Zulu title in our staple of titles, born in 2002, the Isolezwe. I hand this part of the presentation to our editor of Isolezwe, to Daniel Butler.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And thank you, James. Angiqale ngokubonga ngale ngayivele ithuba umhlonishwa uCommission. Akuyona imvama ukuba ulimi lwethu lunikwe ithuba lokukhulumela abantu balo. Silahliwe nje. Ngilapha nje ngimele izigidi zabantu ezingabalandeli beSolezwe. Now, James, I've just said something that made you look sideways. and it's not, my opening remarks are not intended to confuse anyone. They are in isiZulu, of course. But we, really the point is to illustrate the importance of diversity of voices in the media industry. And Isolezwe has for from more than 2 decades, shone light on the potential of vernacular languages in South Africa. And this is the voice that is likely to be silenced if big tech continue to sideline indigenous languages, such as isiZulu. Isolezwe is published in isiZulu language. It is the voice that represents a quarter of the population in South Africa, yet enjoys little to no recognition by big tech. I will say a bit more about this later in my submission. And so maybe just for the benefit of this session, James, I will briefly translate my opening remarks, which simply mean thank you for the opportunity, Commissioner. It is rare that we feature on a platform of this nature as a vernacular language newspaper. Not many care to hear us in our mother tongue, but I'm pretty sure that all are interested in the market that Isolezwe serves, including big tech. I will go into a very, very brief history of Isolezwe as reflected on our first slide. You would have heard in Mohammed's opening remarks, he did take us through some history of independent media. And Isolezwe is really one of the babies in the independent stable, with one newspaper which is younger than it. So we really are one of the youngest newspapers in the stable, only 21 years old. And it just strikes me that, in fact, in the next few weeks, on the 8th of April, we are celebrating our 22nd birthday, and hopefully the commissioner will remember this and send something in our direction. And so at only 21 years old, we are fairly young, by standards of when you look at the history of newspapers in this country. So Isolezwe became the world's first isiZulu news site with the launch of its online platform. And this was, of course, informed by its phenomenal growth in the first 2 years in the print form. And of course, when we looked at the developments in the first 2 years after the title was launched, there was realization that there was a big appetite from the younger readers in the paper. And of course, we realized back then in 2004 that we should look at making our content available on the online platform. And I'll go into a bit some of the milestones of Isolezwe, which is the next slide. I've already spoken about 2004 when we went online, and of course, after some 7-8 years later, after the launch of the daily, of the Monday to Friday edition, Isolezwe launched a Sunday edition, Isolezwe ngeSonto. That was in March. And in 2011, we launched Isolezwe ngomgqibelo, Isolezwe on Saturday. And that kind of completed the puzzle and making Isolezwe a 7-day operation, which is, in my view, a very unique fit, and at least in the publishing industry in the country. Of course, most of you already know that in 2023, last year, Isolezwe ngeSonto came to its tragic end, and after 15 years in the market, and it was merged with Isolezwe ngomgqibelo, giving birth to a new player on the block, Isolezwe ngempelasonto, which basically translates to Isolezwe Weekend. This is our weekend edition that rounds up top stories of the week and setting the tone for the new week. And since the launch, it's just done very well under the circumstances. And I do want to quickly jump onto what I believe is the subject of the day and what the impact has been with Isolezwe. I've already said that it's a very young title, at only 21 years old. And you would have seen that some of the titles are well over 100 years old. And imagine if these titles were humans and they were still alive, and they, the 100 years and older will be going through all sorts of chronic issues, illnesses. But guess what? Isolezwe at the age of 21 is experiencing similar chronic issues that the 100+ years old titles are experiencing. And that's all because of big tech. There's a good side and there's also another side to big tech. And we obviously remain the largest vernacular publication in Africa. I don't know from the information that I have, I don't know of any other vernacular title in Africa that publishes in the African language. I stand to be corrected though. And we now have we have a 6-day operation. And the impact of big tech on Isolezwe has resulted in reduced print orders over the past few years. And we have had to look at staffing all round, and we have had to look at reduction in distribution, which has left us unable to tell our beautiful stories. If you allow me, James, just for a moment, there's a story that I really like to share with my colleagues in the newsroom. I come from a village called Indep. That's like some 4 hours away from Durban, where Isolezwe is based. And that village, I still visit there quite regularly. There is a very famous bus driver. His name is Lucky. He's retired now. He no longer drives a bus, but he was very popular in the area. And this gentleman used to, since its launch, he used to buy the paper because he goes to the nearest town every day in the morning and comes back in the afternoon, ferrying passengers for shopping and for all other different reasons. And he would buy the paper every day. He reads the paper while he's waiting for passengers. And that paper gets shared by almost half the passengers in his bus. And he would still take the same paper and share that paper with his wife. And I met him after a church service in December, and he says to me, I'm going to say this in Zulu. Mfana wami naze nasibulala sekwenze njani manje? Basically saying, what have you done to us, my boy? What has happened to Isolezwe? And I asked him, what are you talking about? And he says, we no longer get the newspaper. And I know that area, because I come from that area, is one of the areas that was affected by the reduction in print orders. Because it, obviously, when you look at business, it became a little unsustainable to keep delivering newspapers in those areas. And this gentleman, by the way, when he was still active, he used to send me messages whenever there's something happening, whatever he believes is a great story. He would say, we have this happening. Have you heard about this? Can Isolezwe come and cover it? And sometimes we would send reporters out there and come out with the most unique stories from that part of the country. And that's what actually, in parts, made Isolezwe great. It made Isolezwe, it created, this impactful newspaper, and then going into these almost unknown villages in KwaZulu-Natal. And then, of course, he also says to me as he continues chatting to me, he says, look, there's another matter. All we hear about politics in this part of the world now is what we get from radio. And also maybe a few politicians who come and tell us their lies. We no longer have Isolezwe telling us those stories. We really get what everyone else is saying about politics. And he's saying, and this is a pure story. I often share this with my colleagues, as I said at the beginning. And so for me, that story touched me. It continues to linger. It's one of the things, and this is, it might seem small, and of course I imagined the different areas that we no longer get to, we no longer reach as a title. And you know, the fact is, over 23% of the population speak in Zulu in South Africa. It's a widely spoken language in our country, and it is the biggest language. But there's no too little recognition by big tech. But our content is taken to build online traffic with no recognition. And of course, Isolezwe does play different roles, beyond just news in different communities. I believe it plays a part in preserving indigenous languages in South Africa, which is I think it's South Africa's constitutional mandate. It's very important for the country if isiZulu and many other vernacular languages are considered official languages. So Isolezwe was one pilot in my view. I really believed, should have informed many people or many publishers to think, to consider publishing in other languages. And so, of course, the impact on the culture of reading. I know of many schools that no longer get the paper in many areas, including townships, because they don't have access to the paper anymore. And they used Isolezwe as a teaching tool in class to teach isiZulu. So, beyond just, being the carrier of news, Isolezwe played, there's other many roles that may seem, maybe to others, not so important. In my view, it is a very important role. We know about the reading culture of the country, the things that we try and do as a country to promote reading. And of course, we think Isolezwe played a very big part. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, PenSALB, the Pan South African Language Board, recognized, which is a very positive development, recognized Isolezwe, and we got an award for playing a part in preserving an indigenous language and publishing in mother tongue. And I think it's very important. And so for me, Isolezwe was this vehicle that carried the news, that covered some of the most obscure stories from different parts of the province and other neighboring provinces. And yet we now, would seem to be, going backwards. And I believe really that, because we now become available on the online platforms. But, of course, for someone in the townships, data is just way too expensive to access the content that we deliver on online platforms. So it's only available to the few. I think I'll try and just wrap it up there, James. But I do need to say at the end that, we continue to be resilient, and I think there's still some room for us as a title. But it's now available on online, and it's
Delani, I think the connection, we're just battling to hear you.
okay. Is it improved now? I don't know
Yes.
when.
Yes,
Okay,
so maybe just sort of backtrack a minute or so.
Okay. At what point did you pick up the point on the schools that
Yes,
having access
so we
to?
got all of that, and also the issue of data. So I think it was just your closing remarks.
Oh yes. No. I think I was making my last point, James, to say that we have a younger sibling, Isolezwe, that obviously comes up to the Xhosa language that's distributed in the Eastern Cape, and it's online, but obviously it's funded by our affiliate, Africa Community Media, and that for us, is in a way it shows that there's still potential for vernacular language media in the country. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thanks, Tilani. I think, Vyasan, if you want to resume with the IOL. Vyasan, I believe you're muted, so we're not getting any audio through on our side. Don't know if you can hear me.
Hey, James, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Apologies for that. Let me just go back a few slides. As I was saying, just about independent online, or IOL. IOL emerged in the late 90s as a very early adopter of digital journalism in South Africa, and has since grown to become the second largest news media platform in the country, with well over between 5 and 8 million people visiting our platform each month. Now, initially it was established as the digital arm of independent newspapers. IOL quickly evolved into a standalone platform, delivering groundbreaking news analysis and multimedia content to a very diverse audience.
Vyasan, I don't want to interrupt, but we've lost your slide. We're just getting, I think, a screensaver.
Oh, okay. Let's try again. Maybe we try and maybe we can stop sharing and maybe start sharing again. Let's try that. This is the impact of big tech I was talking about, James.
Yes, and I think Microsoft went down yesterday, so maybe that's a challenge today.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you able to see the slides now, James?
I believe we can't. I'm just getting told by the tech people here they're not able to see it.
Okay. Try again. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, we can now. Thank you. I think there's probably a little delay coming through to us, but we can see it now. Please continue.
Okay, that's really fantastic. So, as I mentioned, I gave you the just a brief history there, James, around IOL. But what I want to talk to you is what we call this vicious spiral in terms of the impact that big tech has on IOL and other independent publishers that play in the digital space. Now, previously, IOL, like most other independent publishers and websites, we're getting users coming in directly for most part, discovering our content on search engine results pages primarily, and also coming in via social media, actually very predominantly via social media, in particular meta platforms like Facebook, sometimes at a high of around 86% traffic. And then all of a sudden, what we saw in 2023 was Meta decided to reduce its share of news publisher link content to audiences' feeds from 7% to 3%. And fast forward to 2024, and because of those changing algorithms, traffic from social media dropped dramatically. And what we then see is the emerging dominance of search engine results pages, the likes of Google News and Google Discover, meant that more users are now discovering our content via search and foregoing direct navigation to our platforms. Users ended up only clicking the links that Google deemed fit via its EAT algorithm and others. If it didn't deem it fit to share with publishers, then simply wasn't surfaced. So as publishers, we are forced to adapt our content and our distribution strategies to match constantly changing algorithms and having our content having to compete with the billions and billions of other pieces of content that appears on user feeds. And just to give you a visual representation, you can go forward, please. Just a visual representation in terms of the traffic loss just in the period 2019 to 2023. And you can see the amount of traffic that was lost, particularly with regards to social and referral traffic, which is quite drastic. We can move on. So the impact, James, Paula, for us, a lot has been said by our colleagues in the media industry, and I think it's really plain to see that publishers globally are just on this downward trajectory and have been for years, and nothing that we attempt to do is helping us gain any ground. Our acquisition or our audience acquisition from search and social media have plummeted, and that's by and large due to the rapidly changing algorithms that big tech continues to impose on us, while keeping users on their platforms. So this significantly puts publishers like us at a massive disadvantage. If it isn't viral, it's not going to get seen. And this generally leads to important news content, actuality, commentary. I mean, really quality journalism, in essence, that's vital to make sense of our world, being sacrificed on the altar of virality and stickiness on a big tech platform. And the spiral just continues. With lower traffic is lower revenue, ultimately job losses. This also results in lower content outputs, which further impacts revenue. Where does this sort of spiral end? And I think this next statement pretty much sums up how a lot of us and our colleagues in the industry feel. We're playing a game without knowing the rules, because the rules change whenever they feel like, against an opponent who has created the game and is also the referee of the game we are playing. So it puts us at a serious disadvantage. And on top of that, there's the AI effect that we have to start dealing with. And so as a result of the impact that big tech has had on publishers like ourselves, we, like many publishers, would look to generative AI to look at making up a shortfall and how we could supplement what we do. But what does big tech go and do? They then reduce the visibility and discoverability of AI-derived content. So it further impacts our ability to generate content, traffic, or revenue. The likes of semantic search and the likelihood of click-throughs from search engine results pages has been reduced because users simply get the information from the results page without having to actually click through to our content or any of the information that we have. So the irony of it all is that we are providing all of this content, and this content is being used to train all of these generative AI engines that big tech is using. So they've drained all of our institutional knowledge, our historical fact, our quality information and journalism that they need from us without any recourse. And to speak a bit more on the impact of journalism and on the impact of democracy that big tech has had, I'm going to hand you over very briefly to the managing editor of independent media, Melanie Peter.
Thank you, Piers. Thank you, James and Paula, for affording me this opportunity. I've been a journalist for almost 30 years, and I'm deeply invested in passing on my skills to a younger generation of journalists. However, as we witness the profound impact of big tech on journalism, I can't help but wonder what kind of proverbial torch we will be passing on. And here are some of my concerns on the impact of journalism. Content prioritization. Big tech algorithms prioritize content based on engagement metrics, often favoring sensationalism over quality journalism. This leads me to the erosion of trust. Independent publishers face challenges in building trust and credibility amidst the proliferation of misinformation and fake news on digital platforms. We also have a threat to investigative journalism. Declining resources and revenue hinder independent publishers' ability to invest in investigating reporting, and this impacts the quality of democracy. And an impact on democracy is tragic. We have to just look at the independent publishers contribute to a diverse media landscape, essential for fostering informed public discourse and democratic values. Our gatekeeping power has been diminished. Big tech platforms control distribution and visibility of news content, potentially influencing public opinion and political discourse. We look at democratic accountability. The concentration of advertising revenue and control over content distribution by tech companies raises concern about democratic accountability and media independence. It is therefore incumbent upon us to ensure that the media's role in democracy is not diminished. Thank you for that. And for our conclusion, I'll pass you back to Jens.
Thank you, Melanie. To conclude, James, Paula, we were once able to control the means of production and distribution of our product. In this age, our means of distribution have been taken from us. We have to play by the rules of big tech, and we have to adjust our content strategies instead of having news value and it being good for people. We have to start looking at it being good for Google and good for social media. We end up having to prioritize virality over substance because that's what needs to be done in order for us to survive, in order for us to generate enough revenue so that we can survive. And even chasing the revenue that we are looking to survive, it's a minuscule sliver of a piece of the pie that we are all fighting for as independent publishers. And with big tech then continuously deprioritizing publisher content, it's removed the critical discoverability and traffic acquisitions to our platforms, which further impacts our revenue and our reach. The ecosystem that big tech has created, where users are incentivized to remain on their platform and not navigate away from it, means that in order for us to disseminate our content, we need to play by their rules. To conclude, James and Paula, media ultimately is at the mercy of big tech, or as we would like to say at Isolezwe, sisemseni wabani. Thank you, James. Thank you, Paula, and thank you for the team for allowing us to make this very, very important submission to you. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I mean, and thank you for preparing that presentation. We've got a couple of questions that we really want to kind of look at some of the unique challenges that you've identified. And I want to start off by saying, so IIL does not have a paywall. Could you tell us what the thinking was behind that decision?
Well, I think at this stage, I mean, these are interventions that you know, possibly publishers would look at. But we thought the importance of having our journalism, particularly with all of the publishers, you know, well, a lot of the publishers going in the route of subscriptions and paywalls, making our information available freely to our very diverse audience was a very strategic choice that we had made.
Could you give us a sense of your print audience versus your online audience in kind of top level numbers?
Yeah, Mohammed, maybe you want to.
Thank you, Paula. Look, there's a big difference between the print audience, because the print audience, they physically have to buy a newspaper to actually see the content. Obviously, with digital, it's more free. For now, it's free. So there's a vast majority in terms of that. So, for example, if you look at the Isolezwe, I think on the ABCs recently, it was between 17,000 and 20,000 ABCs that for circulation. While if you look at the online platform, I think they're getting close to over 1 million online audience. So there is a vast majority, but and yeah, so it's so that's the difference. There is a big difference, but I mean the content is a bit different from an online point of view and print point of view. Hope that answers your question, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. Vyasan, I don't know if you can stop sharing the presentation and then we'll see everyone in the room.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go.
I just wanted to follow up on Paula's question. So the vast majority of your audience is online, and this is a public hearing, and you should keep your information confidential. But just to get a sense of does the revenue numbers reflect that mix? So would the vast amount of your revenue be coming from online at the moment?
Not at all, James. It's you know, print dollars for digital pennies, really. Even though the audience in digital is substantial, and this just demonstrates the impact of the monopoly that the big tech guys like Google and Facebook have on the digital ad revenue market. It's a substantial difference, nowhere close to each other, if I can say that.
Yeah, thanks. And Tulani, I just wanted to pick up from your side. You said that in essence there's been a decline in the number of printed copies of Isolezwe. And the difficulty is that many consumers are not able to access that because of a lack of data, so they can't access the online. I just wanted to understand the link between the decline in the number of papers and the digital issue. Is it that your advertisers are migrating online, in which case you haven't got enough advertising support for the print copies? Or what is behind that decline in the print volumes? Is it your consumers going online? What is the link?
James, it's a double-edged sword. Remember, I think before that point, I spoke of the need, cutting back our print order. So for me, it's a very basic thing that if you don't supply to certain areas, you're likely to lose those readers. If you don't supply your print edition to those areas, and often the market that we serve, is probably not the markets that can easily access their copy online. So for me, that there's a loss there. And there is no evidence of advertisers migrating to online. There is no real evidence that I can point out. There might be one or two, people, taking that option, but it's that, like Vyasen was saying, it's difficult to compare. It's minuscule what we are able to, in terms of advertising, are able to attract online compared to print.
James, can I ask you this jump in
And
there
I
as
thought,
well?
I mean, the reason we wanted sort of, I suppose, Independent Online and Isolezwe to come together is it provides an interesting contrast. So within the group, you obviously see how you're monetizing or driving traffic on an English version IOL versus an Isolezwe. And I think that has come up, but I was wondering if you could just speak to, oh, sorry, I see the hands up. Maybe if I just finish the question, just speak to those differences, both in terms of where traffic is sourced from and your ability to monetize that traffic. I think Hussein.
I think Mohammed Hussein just wanted to add something to your previous point, James, and then I'll take your question. That's okay.
Certainly.
Thank you, James. What's also important from a print point of view, the cost of delivering the newspaper and the cost of producing that newspaper has significantly changed over the years. And the actual raw materials of producing that newspaper has probably doubled over the last, say, 5 to 6 years. And the cost of distributing that newspaper has also probably potentially also increased quite significantly. So on top of that, with the added suppression on your advertising revenue, and on top of that, with the increase in your costs, it's providing it more and more difficult for Tulani and his audience to get the newspaper now because of the costs. So I just wanted to add that as part of what Tulani said as well. Thank you, James. Yes.
Yeah, James, with regards to your question and the comparative sort of look at Isolezwe and IOL, Google quite simply does not recognize or feature indigenous language content. So the impact on the news publishing industry in general has resulted in a shift of audiences moving online, impacting the revenue, etc. On the print side. But when you do get online, then it's quite simply a lottery of how your content gets surfaced by big tech. And you use these platforms to try and generate an audience, but you're fighting pretty much with one hand behind your back, especially when it comes to indigenous language titles like Isolezwe online. It doesn't feature; it's not recognized by Google News, so it's not surfaced by the algorithms, which means they have to work extra hard to generate more audiences online than IOL would have to, for example. Even given all of that, we essentially, as publishers, are fighting for, I would say, less than 10% of the global ad revenue pie, because that entire ecosystem is controlled. We don't know the rules of the ecosystem. but it's controlled by the likes of Google and Meta. Does that answer your question, James?
Yes, thanks. I wouldn't mind just bringing in Tulani just to give us a sense of more practically the challenges you faced with search referral and that traffic and your users. But also, I know there's been a change in some of the Facebook, but has social media been better from a language perspective and still effective? Because it is posts and following, so it may have less difficulty with language.
I think you're on mute, Tulani.
Sorry about that, James. Yeah, I think like Vyasan has put forward, there's quite a bit of effort that we put into our online platform. Not great deal of resources, but we actually make an effort. As a result, between sharing content from our print edition and generating new content. So there's quite a bit of work that happens there. So, and yes, I agree. Social performs better than our socials at Facebook performs better than other platforms comparatively.
And the deprioritization that's been talked about on social media, has that hit IOL and Isolezwe equally, or is it been disproportionate on one of them?
I don't know, Vyasan, if you can pick up that question.
Sure. We've seen that across the board. James, I'd have to obviously look at a lot more of the detail, and I'll be happy to make a submission to you guys immediately after this call. But from what we've seen in general, it's affected all publishers, irrespective of the language across the board. Because they're prioritizing the prioritization on Facebook has been more around people rather than publications or entities. So you're more likely to see personal posts surface on your Facebook news feed than you would news, for example.
I suppose what I'm also interested is that, it strikes me that if search is poor with African languages and papers like Isolezwe are more dependent on social media, the deprioritization would have a much more significant impact on referral traffic and also on your ability to generate revenue.
Yeah, I think there's another element to that as well, James, in the sense that over the years, before this algorithmic change, so to speak, from Facebook, Isolezwe has done a fantastic job in building a community. So while, when we talk about this discoverability, we're talking about it, popping up onto people's news feeds, for example. But the community that Isolezwe has built has enabled them to sort of lessen the impact, so to speak, because they have people that come looking for them, specifically. So they have to put in a little bit of an extra effort, but thankfully they had previously had that community that was built around them, rather than the spontaneous discoverability of their content in news feeds being deprioritized. And I think that's just another element to that sort of discussion as well that needs to be taken on board.
Tulani and Melanie, Tulani, you were telling the story about the bus driver in your village 4 hours out of Durban, where the newspaper is based. When budgets shrink and newsrooms shrink, Do you have space to still tell those stories? And I'd like to hear, I mean, what stories do we lose in an environment like this? Tulani and also Melanie.
Thank you. It's not the same. Obviously, it would also impact on the uniqueness of the content that Isolezwe provides. We still, obviously, because of the strength of our brand, we still get, people that sort of tip us on the news that come from those areas that we generally would not have, access to as journalists. But it's definitely harder now because you almost have to rely on your readers from those areas. And of course, the uniqueness of the stories is not, the challenges that people face there, whether it's poverty or any other matter. When you cover those areas, it begins to give you the real picture of what South Africa is, outside of the major cities and small towns. And so I think that's the kind of content we would consistently produce in the past. It's no longer the same. We still put some effort into it, and of course, it's become much more expensive to, because of the kind of capacity that we have in the newsroom. It's become more difficult to actually deploy resource to an area that's like 4 or 5 hours away from your office, because that will require like a 2-day sort of, you need to be there the whole day and maybe come back the next day. So it's all about managing those it's economics really at the end of it.
Thanks, Tulani. If I can further elaborate the cost. When I first started in journalism, we had about 50 journalists on the newsroom floor for maybe between 40 and 50 per time. Those resources have been seriously diminished because of cost, and we've spoken about revenue and the importance of us, generating revenue. So if we don't have journalists to send out all these unique stories, it's going to, impact on our storytelling abilities. And that lovely story about the bus driver, those are important stories that we need to continue to tell, and therefore we need investment in journalism, and therefore a share of the revenue. I hope that clarifies the question.
Sorry, James. There's just Sandy Nodia would like to just also say something.
Thank you, James and Paula. I just wanted to make a point, a practical point, that whether it's Isolezwe or Isolezwe Lesikosa or any of the titles in the dailies, the point I want to make is the difference in investment. We have to invest considerably in the tech developments, and that investment in the tech developments to keep up actually impacts on the reduction in our print orders and our ability to deliver the print market. And obviously we're moving into the digital age as well, but it's the cost of investment that we battle with generally to keep up. I speak from a former daily platform to community platforms now as an affiliate, but the cost is prohibitive and keep those markets. Hence the declining market, because of the investment in print, we almost seem to be fighting a giant, almost a David and Goliath. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Sandy, do you still oversee Isolezwe Lesikosa?
We do, Paula.
Yeah.
We are an affiliate division, and we have Isolezwe Lesikosa. I don't want to take the time, but Isolezwe Lesikosa was a daily in 2015. It then became it was a paid daily, and then became a weekly paid title, and then became a free weekly title. It is now a monthly paid title. So the diminishing print orders are because we're pushing our investment into our tech side so that we can try and reach our market with less cost. We actually fund it, to be perfectly frank. We keep it in the market because Africa Community Media actually fund that because it's fundamentally hugely important to keep the language, to keep the ability to reach our voice in the Eastern Cape and beyond. Yes, it's there. It's funded. We pay for it entirely. Thank you.
I mean, I can remember when independent newspapers used to distribute newspapers quite extensively to schools to be used as teaching aids, etc. And Tulani made the point that, I mean, part of the problem is that you're no longer getting Isolezwe to be used as a teaching aid and as a cultural kind of support. And I'm wondering if you're having the same challenge then.
I am, yes, exactly that. We used to deliver, our printing is in Durban, we used to deliver right from Umtata, right down to East London and PE. Those areas have been cut, were better, apologies. And now the schools that we used to deliver to, but there also is a Isolezwe because it was used as a teaching aid. We're no longer able to do that. Now we are trying to develop a strong online platform, but again, data, the cost of data in the Eastern Cape market is quite prohibitive. So, but we need to push that market so at least we can reach our audience. It's affordability. It's affordability, and sometimes you've just got to prioritize with the declining journalists in the market. Thank you.
Thank you for that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe that's a good segue into what I just wanted to discuss about on the monetization front. So I think we heard from Chris at Mediate, who's also coming later as part of the AIP delegation, but that Google doesn't support African languages on its ad tech platform in terms of it cannot serve African language advertisements because, as I understand, their ad blocking technology can't assess whether it contravenes any particular ad rules. It also can't translate from an English into an African language, and so it's difficult to monetize, at least for advertisers who wish to reach those markets in their own language. So can I just understand, I suppose the advertising, online advertising for Isolezwe, and the use of, is there use of any of the Google tools, or are you constrained to just placing your own ads and inserts directly?
Lani, would you like me to take that question with regards to the ad tech?
That's fine. I think Mohammed or yourself can pick up that question on advertising.
James, so basically it is very difficult to generate any sort of digital direct advertising. So the advertising that you sometimes would see on the Isolezwe platform is mostly programmatic ads. There are ads served. I know that there is some sort of threshold that they've introduced in terms of the amount of traffic that indigenous language sites generate. If I'm not sure in terms of what the threshold is in terms of audience size before they could generate any revenue from there. But definitely on the ad tech market on the ad tech side there is a limitation when it comes to the serving of ads in vernacular languages, etc.
And is that hampering your ability to monetize, or are you monetizing in different ways, rather? Because also programmatic does take a cut, and direct can get more revenue for you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the age-old thing with all of the media organizations. We have to look at various ways to diversify our revenue streams. So we try a whole range of things. Whether they are content-led projects, sponsored content, partnerships, etc. That's one way of doing it, but it doesn't come anywhere near the cost or the investment of running these tech platforms, and it just doesn't add up. Yet our traffic that we generate, that we work so hard to generate, is used within the big tech ecosystem. And they obviously benefit on the programmatic side as well. So, yeah, when we say it's a vicious cycle, it really is.
Cape Town.
Sorry, Paula, seems a bit, we have a bit of a spotty connection. Might have lost you there.
For a minute or so.
Yes. Sorry, we're unable to hear anything, Paula.
Mohammed, could you, Hussein, could you state your answer? I think we lost you there for quite a bit of time.
Oh, sorry. With regards to the issue around generating revenue and income streams around Isolezwe in particular, as I was saying, like most of the media entities and independent publishers, we have to look at various other ways because we hampered, hampered in that regard. We have to look at other ways like sponsored content, partnered content, editorial campaign ideas that are targeted at driving revenue. But even with the point I was making, even with all of that hard work, it's still nowhere near covers the investment that we have to make into that tech on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, to cover that cost. So it is, as I said earlier, when we talk about this vicious cycle, it is quite a vicious cycle.
Can I just follow up on that question? I mean, there's a bit of a sort of disjuncture here in the sense of you're putting a lot of money into the tech to keep up, but you're not getting the return on it. But you're also then having to sacrifice some of the print because your costs in digital. I just wanted to understand that sort of apparent paradox. I mean, is it just that if you didn't have a digital presence, that would start to really impact other factors? Or how do you think about it in your investment decisions?
Yeah. James, I'm just going to jump in there from the background. Yes, it would have an impact because moving the investment is absolutely critical because obviously there's a digital future for all of us as media owners. So moving the investment to print is a must. It's not something that you can ignore and say we're going to carry on just with print because print costs rise all the time. So to me, the switch in investment does impact on, and I'm talking, I think, for my colleagues, with all the daily newspapers and our indigenous titles, and even our, in my case, community titles. We have to be able to budget for that and make sure that the budget includes substantial tech development costs, and that of course comes at the cost of staff cuts, as we've spoken about, declining distribution areas and declining print orders. So it's the switching budgets that's not stacking up.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy,
We're
for
kind
that.
of losing on both sides, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword. The journalism's been completely decimated because we have to switch those budgets. And by switching those budgets, we're declining on our print side, which was our major revenue, and we can't keep up with the tech because I'll be very blunt, we can't actually afford to. That's my point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I understand it now a little better, so thank you for that. On that point, I mean, in digital, you can invest in your website and then related sort of search, SEO, etc. And you can invest in your Facebook page or other social media pages or posts. And I mean, as we understand, a lot of media put effort into their website page because that's where you want the referring traffic to land, and it's your ability to monetize. So you see that as a monetization channel, and obviously you get direct traffic, which you can monetize. Just so I can understand the Facebook investment, there are some ways to monetize Facebook, and maybe you can just flesh that out. But is it mostly about getting referral to your web page because the ability to monetize on Facebook is limited, or are you using it to also drive a monetization on Facebook?
No, primarily to drive traffic or audience to our web platforms. That's been most publishers would focus a lot of energy on that because the revenue streams on Facebook itself, you're monetizing an audience. So you could have a following of 1 million people, for example, on your platform, and you'd monetize by offering them access to that audience as a publisher. But primarily, it has been to drive audiences and traffic to a web platform that you have a better chance, an opportunity of monetizing.
And as a follow-up to that, I mean, I was really struck by your traffic loss slide that showed, I think it was in 2019, that 4 out of 10, 38% of your traffic was direct, and now you're looking at 1 out of 10, 87% being direct, and the rest is all referral. And I wondered if you could comment on what do you lose when that shift happens? What is your relationship with your audience like when they're coming via a third party?
Well, I mean, generally in terms of audience nature, that little snapshot was just to show you the impact of these algorithmic changes that it had. By and large, content consumption, the culture of content consumption has also changed. Big tech has changed the behavior of how people consume content. So they don't necessarily have to click through to our sites anymore because the search engine results pages carry all of the content that they want. And as we know, more and more audiences are consuming content in a very ephemeral way. It's this instant gratification sort of culture of consuming content. So, by and large, it reduces the impact of publishers like ourselves that produce verified quality information to audiences.
Give us in just very kind of broad percentages what the referral sources are, how much is coming from Microsoft Start, from Google Discover, from Google News, and from social media, just broadly. It doesn't have to be actual numbers.
Sure. So as I said, I think between right now, I would say our biggest contributor to our traffic is via search. Quite recently, just over 50% of that traffic via search. I would say another maybe 20% of that via social, and the other bits and bobs made up of direct traffic and other sort of indirect sort of traffic sources. Yeah, but it's landing page sort of traffic and that sort of thing. But by and large, I'd say around 70%, 75% of that traffic is in the hands of search and social.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we use similar web to sort of contrast, but I think the contrast between Isolezwe and IOL is quite stark, in the sense of, I think, social media referrals are higher than search referrals, and what's interesting and may reflect the limitations of Google on language, but 2/3 of those search are coming from people basically typing in Isolezwe, so they know where they're going, rather than actually discovering content or discovering.
Yeah, and James, sorry, James, that's the point I was making.
Does any of the news from Isolezwe make it onto Google News or Google Discover? Tulani?
Oh, sorry, Tulani's on mute.
Tulani on mute.
Sorry, just to repeat that last part of the question, James.
It was just whether any of your content makes it onto Google News or Google Discover, which is that scrolling on the Android phone.
I'm not sure if I have the full answer for you there, but I think the point that Viasen made about just the strength of the Isolezwe as a brand to its own readers, and I think it's probably been of great benefit to us. So I may have to go back and get you a specific answer around the Google.
Doesn't appear, James, if I can just jump in there, doesn't appear on Google News or Discover.
We're almost out of time. I just wanted to pick up, I mean, you mentioned AI, but we also heard last week from Professor Marivati that certainly news content may be valuable partly for translation. So where you've got, let's just take Isolezwe as a case in point, it's a depository of a large amount of written isiZulu, and some of that content may well be translated, and then you have options to look at the translate. And we heard about the AI crawlers that come through. I mean, has Independent looked at blocking the AI crawlers at this point, or have you put in a policy about how you're going to deal with AI?
I think it's very firmly on our agenda. I mean, we've seen a significant increase in these crawlers and our content popping up here, there, and everywhere. And we've actually put together an AI task team within the group that has been designated the task of looking at the impact and how we negate or accommodate in some way, shape, or form. So that's being developed, and it's something that we're definitely looking at.
And maybe just the last question. I mean, Google says you have the choice of whether to allow their crawler in and also how big a snippet to provide, if any. Do you feel you have a choice?
No. Yeah. We've never had a choice. Ever.
Well, thank you very much, Viasen and Tulani and the Mohammed and Melanie and Sandy, for all of your useful input. I think, again, you bring a very different perspective as well to bring the strength of the African language and the importance, I think, as Tulani put it, to community and to community building, and hearing stories that would not be heard because they're not happening in the metro areas. And so I think it's been very valuable for the panel. We want to thank you for also all the effort you've put into your submissions and the effort to come and participate in the public hearings. We really appreciate it. And we may well have more questions for you as we wrap up the public hearings and just move to putting together the provisional report. But we look forward to your future inputs as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Paula. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be joined by the Association of Independent Publishers for their last session this morning. Welcome back, and we welcome at the DTIC campus the Association of Independent Publishers, and we have Kate Skinner, the Executive Director for the AIP, and joined by Adam Oxford, who's from the Consultancy Area of Effect, who's participating in AIP Sustainability Committee, and another well-known face, Chris Mwinga, who is here for the third time. So we welcome you. But you have a presentation, Kate, and so please go through that, and then Paul and myself will have some questions.
Fantastic, thank you. Is this online? I mean, is this working? Yeah, perfect. All right, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you to the commissioners and thank you to the technical team. I think, I know you've done an incredible amount of work on it, and it's a real honor to be able to have this opportunity to talk to you and to put forward our views as AIP. So first of all, what I want to do is to talk about us as an association. And the reason why I want to do that is because I think it's very important for you to get a sense of the community print and online media sector. And we are basically a membership-based association established in 2004 to represent online print publications, so online and print publications. And then just to say, and I'm sure most people do know this, but, you know, what is community media? What is community print and online media? How do we define it? And the way we define it is basically it's community, geographical communities and community of interest. And when we're talking about community of interest, it's very varied if you're talking about community media in our sector. It's everything from science, religion, culture, arts, business, etc. So it's both of those things. Also to say that we are the biggest association of small publishers in Africa, and that we represent most, but not all, the community publications in South Africa. So I think it's important to understand that. But we do, the vast majority would be our members, and then also to get a sense of, you know, who we are. Mainly for profit. Organizations, SMMEs, small, some bigger, some smaller, but also interestingly, we also have not-for-profits. We have NGOs and donor-funded publications, and interestingly, more of our publications are considering actually going for the not-for-profit, and it's a survival tactic. It's saying that actually maybe we could survive better if we were donor funded or we had some kind of donor funding coming in. So that I think is an important point. The other thing that I want to say is that our publications are not affiliated to the mainstream media publishers. So we're not Caxton, we're not Arena, we're not Media 24, or independent. Our publications have a very diverse independent ownership. And what I think is very important to say is that we are based in the communities that we serve. So we don't produce content centrally. Our publishers are right there in the communities, delivering to those communities, members of those communities, and I think it's just an important point to make. I've then looked at the issue of national stats. Now, you might be saying, well, why are you putting national stats up there? Like, what's the point of this? It's just because, again, I think we are a very big association, and by talking through our national stats, I think you're going to get, again, a little bit more of a flavor, a sense of what this sector is about. So, you know, as of January 2024, we had 2.5 million printed copies that came out monthly. And then we talk about a collective readership of 7.5 million readers. That's huge. That's really big. And I just want to emphasize that, because there's often a sense that community print and online is very small, and that, in fact, you know, if you're talking about community, you're talking about community radio. I think we have to make the point that it is actually pretty big. I am going to talk about how we have diminished quite substantially, but even so, right now we are pretty significant. So we have 178 publications, 147 publishers basically produce those. We're mainly male publishers, which is interesting. There's only a few female publishers, but let me say that the powerhouses are actually most of the women. Our chair, our deputy chair, and 50% of our board are women publishers, and they are, you know, as I say, powerhouses. I then want to talk very briefly, and this is something that Adam is going to talk about, and definitely Chris is going to talk about us going online. And so just for you to understand that we have, from those publications, 104 of those have got websites. Active websites, there are more websites than that, but in terms of active websites, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter or X, and there's been a big drive to push our publications online. But as Adam is going to talk about, it's been a very hard process going online, but there's been a big drive. And then a final just issue around our national stats, because I want people to understand this, is that language diversity is something which is deeply significant and for AIP publishers. If you look at our publications, I talk about us being language diverse. 109 of the publications are language diverse. What do I mean by that? I mean, they are not primarily in English. So you'll have a lot of publications which will be in all different African languages, in Afrikaans. Some of them will be in multiple languages. And when I talk about language diverse, they might have English as part of that. But that is a significant number, and all the 11 official languages are basically covered. And I think that that's amazing when you're looking at print. Very briefly, I want to talk about, just to give you, again, a final sense of so what are we talking about these in terms of diversity of voice? So one of our publications, the publisher is Slindile Kanile. You've met her. She's got Umbele. It's an online isiZulu business publication. It's the only one in the country. We need to keep that voice going. Anton van Zyl, Limpopo Mirror and Zoutpansberger, he's been going, since the 1990s. He's produced award-winning investigative journalism covering municipal and lotto corruption. Deeply significant for his own community, but also simultaneously very significant nationally, because we now know about a whole lot of things which would never have come to light if that publication had not been there. And finally, just briefly, Mahmoud Sanglia, Muslim Views, an decades-old publication, basically serving a very significant, important Muslim community in the Western Cape, and actually, interestingly, nationally and internationally as well. These are the voices that we need to protect. Again, I want to talk, not in a lot of detail, but just the Commission asked us about, so what does the environment look like? What does the media landscape and environment look like? And so I want to talk a little bit about COVID. We had very difficult times. In 2016, before COVID, there was some significant research done in terms of AIP publications, and it's just interesting to look at that research that was done. At that particular point, there were 204 publications. The overall print run was 7.5 million copies monthly, and 22.6 million readers. That's huge. We now have a readership of approximately 7.5 million, and that is basically a reduction of 15.1 million monthly readers have dropped over 8 years. So we're still significant, but when you look at that is the drop from 2016 to now. That is significant, and that we're losing that diversity, and we need to do something very significant about it. Just very briefly to say that, COVID was difficult for us in terms of online. It was also very difficult in terms of printing. In fact, the majority of publications stopped printing, but then post-COVID, there were some green shoots. A lot of publications started printing again, but it was fewer copies and much less frequently. Also, just a point to make is that the print costs surged for various reasons, which we can go into. I mean, one being the Ukraine-Russian war. For some reason, they actually impacted print prices. So it's just to say that so then this big push for people to go online, and yet going online was so difficult that, in fact, some of our online-only publications have now decided that they're going to have a print version just to survive. So, and again, Adam is going to talk to that in quite a lot of detail. So my final slide for now is just to say, so what has AIP been doing about it? I mean, have we been proactive or have we been sitting back? And I want to say that we have been super proactive. We have looked at every possible way of dealing with the situation. So we formed a sustainability committee. We've got 12 pilots on the go looking at sustainability issues. We have sent 10 publishers to Ohio in the US to look at how they are surviving, the US publications, rural and small town publications. We've participated hugely in this process. I mean, I'm laughing about Chris having participated. This is his third time up at the, and thank you, Chris. So we've been at the SANIF one, we've done our own, and we've had a number of publishers that have come and spoken. And thank you to the Commission for putting that amount of effort into it. I mean, it's hugely appreciated. The other thing that we have done is that we've been working with Google. We've done training sessions with Google, and we have started to work on a plan to put together a digital transformation fund for small and medium publishers that are members of the Press Council. Let me leave it there and hand over to Adam.
Thanks, Kate. Good morning, Commissioner Hodge, Commissioner Frey, and to the tech team, who I think I'm going to be addressing a few comments to. So I'm very grateful to be invited to speak here by Kate and yourselves. I'm an independent consultant. I do a lot of work with small newsrooms, small independent publishers around the world, particularly on audience growth and sustainability issues in digital publishing. And as part of that work, I sit on the Sustainability Committee for AIP and offer a little bit of advice here and there on kind of what might work, what might not work for these entrepreneurs in the sector. So I think, are you still controlling the slide? Sorry. So the kind of what I want to talk a little bit about is the challenges of AIP I see are really that they're trying to compete in the digital sector. They're trying to compete as digital publishers, but they're effectively competing without resources, and resources in terms of finance, in terms of technical skills, in terms of access to market, that they do not have for a wide variety of reasons, partly to do with the current socioeconomic conditions of the communities they publish in, but a lot to do with historical access to financing and skills as well. And I think just to kind of, what I want to try and do is sort of really focus on 2 or 3 very specific day-to-day problems that community publishers are going to face or are facing as they go through this process of digital transformation. Look very specifically, because I think that's something that the Commission needs to hear. You know, the tiny problems that mount up and create blockages to success. And to do that, I want to start off looking at some of the presentations that we've already had. And again, you know, we recognise that Google is by far the most proactive of the platforms when it comes to interacting with media. But even so, they still represent a monopoly, not just on 2 sides of the market. It's a monopoly for access to readers, it's a monopoly for access to advertisers, and it's a monopoly for advertiser access to space on the publications. Meta, TikTok, X are effectively an oligopoly. They control all of closed social media, which is not an open platform. And I did have a wry smile at Google's slide where they very openly shared their estimation of the revenue they made from news media in 2022, and we very rarely see those numbers. So, thank you very much for sharing them. And while I appreciate that 35 million rand is a small amount of revenue for Google, when we're talking about community media, we're talking about single-person operators, often relying on networks of volunteers. Their budgets are, in a survey that we did recently, often less than 20,000 rand a month, and interviews that I've done as part of research, a lot of the founders, a lot of the people who run these publications, they're not drawing a salary from the publication. They are really doing it because they believe passionately in the democratic and constitutional value of producing good quality, independent local news. And I think that exists beyond the financial value of news. It is a far bigger effect to, or far bigger concern, I think, for most of the publishers. I wanted to include this very quickly. There's some very good research about how do you make money online as a digital publisher. Very good research from an academic called James Brenier. He identifies 12 different ways of making money online. And received wisdom is pretty much that you should choose between 2 and 6 of those if you want to be sustainable. The key to sustainability is diverse, different revenue streams. There's some research that says any more than 6, and you start getting too distracted to actually focus on earning revenue from them. But we're talking small publishers who 2 or 3 different streams of revenue is really what's needed to keep an organization alive and thriving. The problem is there is no magic formula. There's no recipe for these 2 or 3 revenue streams are going to work in this particular community or for this particular radio station or this particular newspaper. The only way we figure out the right business model is generally through trial and error, through experimentation and through acquiring a lot of business skills from somewhere, understanding these different ways of raising money and being able to compare them to one another and choose the right compromise. And that is not trivial. It requires years of experience, knowledge. We know within AIP's community there are people with MBAs who are publishing community news, as well as people with almost no access to higher education at all. So I think just understanding how this revenue mix knits together in the most effective way for your publication is really problem one, because until you can figure out the right revenue mix, you can't really think about sustainability in the long term. So if we talk about the revenue streams, the first thing we need is access to audience, and that means competing in what is to a large extent an under-regulated attention economy. Again, I'm going to use Google's example purely because they are the ones that come here and share how it's done. They open their presentation with a very interesting and informative description of how robots text works on a website. If I'm a community news publisher and I am concerned about Google stealing my copy or money being made from my content without fair recompense, I can go to my robots text file and I can say, Google, please do not index my content. Doing that is not as simple as it sounds. For most publishers, they do not have access to the server-level administrative privileges to change that file. And they probably wouldn't know how to change it if they did. It's a technical challenge that requires an understanding of how websites work, how technology works, that most journalists do not have. And even if they did have that knowledge, why on earth would they want to stop Google indexing their content? Regardless of what they feel about fair recompense, they have no choice but to allow the search engine to access them. If they don't allow that, they have no readers. The readers cannot find them online. So competing, so they are forced into the decision they have to compete in search. There is no option but to compete in search. And competing in search means evoking the kind of 3 dread letters for a journalist: search engine optimization. How do I make my website friendly for a search engine? And the best way of kind of illustrating where current thinking is around that is if you think of a contemporary recipe site. And I think, this is a fairly common experience. I've decided I want to cook malva pudding for dinner tonight, so I'm going to Google a recipe for how to cook malva pudding, and the first hit I get has got 8 pages of story about the history of malva pudding, the history of the author's interaction with the malva pudding, before it gives me the recipe and how to make it. That is search engine optimization. That is time and effort spent on creating content that can be indexed by the search engine so the search engine can understand what it is you're publishing and put you in front of the right readers. That is time, effort, and also skill and understanding of what the search engine is looking for that are all difficult, expensive skills to acquire. It is not a case of, as Google themselves pointed out, keyword stuffing. I cannot say I'm going to become the #1 publisher in Limpopo just by including the word Limpopo in every headline and every story that I put out there. I have to be more strategic about the way I use SEO. This is a difficult thing, because SEO consultants get paid a lot of money to help news organizations with this challenge. And up to about 18 months ago, pretty much all of the information about SEO that was available online was dedicated towards e-commerce. To find information for news websites was almost impossible. That's changing. We've seen a few really interesting projects trying to help news organizations to master these skills and understand them. But they're still websites that are published in Canada or the US, very, very jargon heavy. And as a journalist, it would take me years to actually have that knowledge sink in and be able to use it on a day-to-day basis. So these are the kinds of challenges that I think community media is facing in a very real way. You cannot build a website and they will come. We cannot just give people a website and hope that the community is going to be able to find them. We have to engage in these tactics to find the community where they are. What makes this even harder is, of course, that all of the platforms are a moving target. I don't know if anybody is aware, if it's been discussed at the Commission so far, but last week Google announced there is a major update to its search algorithm coming, in which it is going to cut out results that are obviously generated by conversational artificial intelligence. This is, on the face of it, a great thing for journalists. If there is less content in the first page of search results that is generated by large language model AIs, that surely is a good thing for me as a journalist, because it means there's going to be more content that is generated by humans. Except that over the last 6 months, the last year, all of the conversation is about how I should be investing in AI as a journalist, how a community media can use a very cheap conversational AI to start generating search engine friendly traffic pages. So we have this thing, where do I invest? How do I know that my investment that I make today is actually going to be worth anything tomorrow? Because all of a sudden, that investment's worth nothing. This is Google, by far the worst culprit in this case, or in this particular activity, is Facebook. We saw the disastrous pivot to video. I'm sure those words have come up over the course of the Commission. For years, Facebook told all the news publishers, short-form video is where it's at. Invest all of your skills in short-form video. We will promote you. We will put you in front of our audiences. And then they switched it off without notice, without warning. Millions of dollars of investment gone. The same thing is happening now. Facebook is switching off its news tab, I believe, at the moment in certain territories. And they are generally deprioritizing news in their news feed, and have been doing for a long, long time. I spent a stint working at the Mail and Guardian during COVID, and the amount of traffic, I can't disclose the figures, but the amount of traffic that was coming from Facebook pre the big changes that came to the algorithm over 2016 to 2019, and the amount of traffic that came afterwards was easily 6-digit page numbers. So yeah. And then on the final point of that is that the real lack of transparency is that I have no idea whether or not I've been blacklisted from appearance in particular feeds. And again, Google Discover is a real challenge in this regard, in that one day I'm going to be in Google Discover, the next 3 months I might not be there. And I have no idea whether it's something I've done as a publisher, if they've found me publishing misinformation, disinformation, and taken positive action to remove me from their database, or if I'm just not hitting the technical notes to have the right size pictures, which is part of the technical scope to get into Discover. So these are all things, it is difficult. I think the point I'm making is this is complex technical knowledge which just does not exist in the volume we need it within the IIP membership. So, moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about analytics. I'm going to try and be quick because I don't want to speak for too long. But obviously to build an innovative, effective digital products in any market, whether we're talking news, whether we're talking delivery services, whether we're talking e-commerce, we have to have a really, really good understanding of the underlying analytics. We have to be able to understand our audiences, not just in the way that IIP members currently do by going out and talking to them and having one-on-one conversations with people, but looking at them en masse. What are the digital signals that are coming back? How can I improve my products? If I'm not hitting the audience today with this headline, how do I improve the headlines for tomorrow so I can hit more of the audience? This is, in and of itself, again, a huge technical investment to understand. But the analytics we're supplied by the platforms are opaque, they're not transparent, and they're constantly changing. Last year, Google switched off Universal Analytics, a very successful product that had near universal use across the news industry. Was relatively well understood. I would say most news publications still only really used about 5% of its total capabilities. And they moved to Google Analytics 4. In Google Analytics 4, a user doesn't mean the same thing as a user in Universal Analytics. They're measured in two, not completely, but slightly different ways. So if I've transitioned from one set of analytics to another, the documentation that explains this is out there, but it's deep in Google's help files, it's deep, wrapped in technical knowledge and jargon. And I might just have switched on Google Analytics without understanding that differentiation, that am I seeing a traffic drop? Am I seeing a traffic increase? Is my product doing better? Is my product doing worse? I don't know. I'm operating in an informational vacuum. Worse than that again is social media. The big number we're sold on in social media, big numbers, reach, or followers. Reach doesn't mean anything. Reach is the number we're given, but that just means your story appeared in front of somebody for maybe a tenth of a second as they scroll past onto something else. That is one reach. It means nothing to me as a news publisher who's trying to build a loyal audience of dedicated readers, because that's where value is generated. There is no loyalty metric in Facebook. There is no way of saying 100 people saw this story. 50 of those people have looked at previous stories that you published. Therefore, they might be interested in hearing more from you and are worth following up with paid campaigns, for example. That doesn't exist. In fact, in Facebook, you have what I think is one of the most misleading operations that exists, which is the follow button. A user who clicks I want to follow or like a news website might reasonably be expected to see everything that news publisher publishes. When I click that button, I might reasonably have the expectation that now I'm following your newspaper, I'm going to see your stories. And the publisher might have the reasonable expectation that once somebody is a follower, they see everything I publish. And that is absolutely, definitely not the case. I have a slightly higher chance of appearing in your curated newsfeed. That decision is made by Facebook, whether or not I appear in your newsfeed. It's very, very little to do with have I clicked the follow button. And that is a very misleading signal, but it's the only one we have as publishers. We are, again, operating in an information vacuum when it comes to building the loyal audiences we need to sustain news media. And ultimately, our goals are different to the platforms. You know, the platform's goal is to keep people on the platform at all times and monetize them there. The more traffic they send away from the platform, the less they make in revenue. The platforms are not designed to benefit news publishers at all. And just to kind of, I just wanted to pause briefly and put this into kind of context in terms of the work I do outside of AIP. I work in newsrooms all over the world. I work with small independent publishers in South Africa, Southern Africa, Nigeria, the USA, Canada, Central Europe. And most of the engagements that I take part in are pretty well funded. There are players like Open Societies, like the MDIF, Google as well, who pay for consultants to engage in one-to-one mentoring and coaching over long periods of time, 6 months periods of time. We go through SEO, we go through the news algorithm, we go through Discover, we go through how to publish effective digitally. At the end of a 6-month engagement, that kind of intensity, I would say probably 9 out of 10 publishers that I work with are still only just beginning to see how this is relevant to their day-to-day work. We talk about complicated marketing principles like an awareness funnel or a customer funnel, which is there because you cannot build a news website and they will come. How do we attract attention? How do we bring attention to the site? These are all actions that successful publishers are doing. And the important thing I think to take away for me is that this is a sector that is incredibly dynamic. There are very successful entrepreneurs out there who are using these tools to build sustainable news websites across South America, across Central Europe, across Asia, in markets that are not that different to South Africa at all. But this is the kind of time and effort that they need to help get them over the line to that point. And I think, just speaking about the incredible work Chris does, it's incredible. But at the rate we're going, it will take us 10 years to reach all of AIP's membership. And that's only with, I think it's fair to say, probably the first part of this story when it comes to digitalization. Sorry, slide. And again, what are we putting all this work in for? What are the potential gains at the back of it? And most publishers that I speak to still see advertising as being the ultimate goal. If I build a website, if I start a YouTube channel, I will make money from advertising. And the basic laws of economics just say it's not going to happen. Because the most basic law of economics says that if I have an infinite supply of a product, in this case advertising space, which is always growing because there are always people producing more advertising spaces by producing more content that go into the Google or Facebook machines. But there's a finite supply of advertisers who want to buy those space. So the cost of that space is always, always, always going to go to the cost of production for Google, because Google controls the marketplace, or Facebook, or whoever the intermediary is. It's never going to come to the cost of production even for the publisher. And I think that's the important point. The important point is that relying on advertising and hoping that if I grow my audience, we're seeing now the creator economy in the broader global perspective. You know, people with huge audiences of 1 million plus who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, they can't sustain the work involved in monetizing their work through programmatic advertising. But there is so much research out there, and this report, the Inflection Point International report, they've done a lot of work in this area. They are showing over and over again that those news entrepreneurs who get the support, who get the access to resources, get the access to skills they need, they are successful. And when we look at a long-term picture for AIP members, I genuinely believe that there is a roadmap that says a large number of them will be sustainable in 10 years' time, but they really need those resources now to get there. So essentially, we need space, we need resources, we need funding to innovate. And one of the things I think has been mentioned previously, sorry, the next slide, Kate, sorry. One of the things that I think has been mentioned previously is that what the lack of those resources, what the lack of ability to compete effectively digitally is meaning is that when you look at AIP's membership, one of the things that really strikes me as very unexpected is that it is young, it is youthful. Most publications that I speak to are less than 10 years old. These are, really committed, dynamic entrepreneurs who are thinking about their output in the way that they want to be sustainable. But out of 12 publications I interviewed recently, only 3 were digital first, and one of those was the publisher that Kate was talking about earlier, who has just launched a print version because it's the only way that she can see to get through the immediate needs of her business. Print is not sustainable for many publishers because the revenues that are generated based on the 2 main revenue streams, leaflets and government ads, they are in decline. Print is really important, but we are applying the same arguments to print output as we are to digital.
Great. So just our last slide, and what I want to say about these issues in terms of a way forward is to say these are very high level. We know that these have been presented already by SANEF, but we just want to reiterate them and also to say that we as AIP are really debating and negotiating the issues, and when we come again in the next stage we'll put a few more. But basically the first thing that we are 100% behind is the provision of access to credible news as a public good should be considered as a human rights issue, not only as a matter of commercial competition. We really strongly believe in that. Fair compensation for news in the public interest used on platforms should be based on the value that platform derives from the content. I have to say that we agree with this, but only as a starting point, and we're happy to answer questions on that one. We absolutely believe that credible news should be prioritized by platforms, and we believe it's an antidote for mis- and disinformation. So we, again, want to 100% back that one. And then the final one, which we really, again, want to back, is the transparency of algorithms and sharing of data related to news content and related advertising on platforms should be promoted, as well as access to data that publishers can use to promote and monetize their content. The issues around transparency, again, we want to reiterate and put back onto the, I'm sure it hasn't gone away, but on the Commission's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one of the advantages of a public hearing, of course, is that it gives us an opportunity to also educate the public on the sector and how it performs and the differences within the sector. So yesterday when Caxton came, they actually spent some time explaining the differences between the local newspapers and AIP's community newspapers. But I wonder if you could expand a little bit, and I want you to think of it in terms of 3 different things. What is the description of your typical member, so in terms of size, but also in terms of the kind of content that they would be focusing on? And how many staffers, for example, would a typical community newspaper actually employ?
Chris, I'm happy for you to go on this one, yeah.
having us, me again. I really do appreciate the time. For those who have not been here before, my name is Christopher Mcinga. I am here to assist with AIP as I sit on the Sustainability Committee of AIP, and also I am driving the digitization drive for SANEF, which AIP also has a seat at the table in SANEF. And then also I'm here on behalf of my own publications as well as a publisher. So asking this question, Paula, is really important to assist everyone, the public and also the Commission, to understand the kind of makeup of a community newspaper. And I think, they vary. There are those publications that are maybe a couple of decades old, and they might have maybe 5 or more staff members. But those are the ones that have been printing consistently. They've got a kind of relationship within the community with your cash and carry stores, in terms of advertising and regular advertising. Those are the ones that are either having a founder who is also the wife or the husband, kind of a family type of business, and perhaps maybe one of their sons is selling advertising as well. And then perhaps 2 people, I'm talking now in general about what it looks like, maybe 2 people doing the editorial, the foot on the ground, going after articles and stories, and then perhaps 1 person distributing the newspaper. So that's pretty much a kind of established, really long-standing kind of a newspaper. But then you have those startups as well that are, kind of bootstrapping. They start their newspaper. Some of them also, Paula, before I just unpack that one, they also, let me call it this way, they might have a permanent job as well, and they're doing this on the side as a side hustle. All right, those are usually one-man shows. Then they will take on a freelancer who's going to write for them, and then they put the newspaper together. Most of them, I could say, they outsource their production in terms of print layout, getting it print ready. They would outsource it to a local graphic designer at a cost of, let's say, about 2,000 Rand, which roughly works out to, let's say, an average 8-pager, which is what a small newspaper or independent newspaper would probably be printing, unless they are MDPMI funded and they print a 16-pager as an example. Most of them are probably producing at about an 8-pager. So the cost there of just putting the newspaper together would go to a local graphic designer for 2,000 Rand, charging each page layout per page. So those are one-man shows, maybe having their own call it job, and then doing this on the side, but also having the editorial oversight because of obviously the accountability of that publication. But then you also have those publishers that are more kind of streetwise, in a sense of they would have a partner, and then they would have freelancers who would then be the writers of the stories. Those freelancers would either be university students or those that could not land jobs, and they're just doing it as a favor. So, well, not really as a favor, but as kind of experience, getting themselves published. So that's kind of like a broader picture of what it looks like, but you're not talking now about big newsrooms and a department that's got graphic design and a department that's sales or a department that's distribution. So that's pretty much the picture.
And just as Chris was talking there, it made me think of the conversation in the sustainability community WhatsApp group this morning wasn't, hey, you three, go and take every penny you can from the Competition Commission. It was, there's this great speaker who talks on managing interns. How do we get access to her to build our business? We need these human resources, these people management skills as much as we need the digital skills, and that is absolutely reflected in the inflection points report as well. The most in-demand skills are leadership and people management. And I think, again, for any business owner, where do you put your time and money when you're operating without any resources in the first place?
When I hear Kate speak about it's a 15 million drop, that's 60% of readership during COVID. I'm kind of wondering, we've been hearing about news deserts, we've been hearing about the loss of diversity and in terms of new voices. Do you have a sense of the publications that closed over COVID, which communities they represent, and are there new media taking over those places, or are those communities without media?
So let me start, and I mean, obviously, please join. So just to talk a little bit about that 15 million, that is from 2016 to today. So it includes COVID, but also it was already starting before COVID. So I think that's an important point to make. I think during COVID it was interesting. I think a lot of publications are closed, but they didn't close permanently. What happened is that they closed, and then what happened is that they came back, and then they started printing again, but they printed much more irregularly and far fewer copies. So I think that's also something to say. In terms of the kinds of publications that closed permanently, we still, Paula, I have to say, need to do a lot more research on that. It's more our anecdotal kind of sense of, literally, I mean, it was publications all over the country, particularly in kind of rural areas. My understanding would be, some of the smaller towns, places with very, very small amounts of resources were ones which said, you know what, actually, we just can't do this. But what I find really interesting, and I mean, I'd love Chris to come in here particularly, is that what I find interesting about publishers, that even if they haven't been printing or publishing anything for like 3, 4, 5 years, they're still saying, I'm a publisher, and when I get the money, I will come back and I will publish. And I find that really amazing because of that sense of resilience, like we are still going to come back. So that, I think, also makes the statistics quite complicated because you can't literally say they have closed permanently, because if the money comes in, they will come back.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that. And I think on that point as well, when you say that when the money comes in, it's a matter of if a municipality is issuing out a vacancy ad or a notice. And those notices for a full page, for example, might be in a cost of about 20,000 Rand upwards. That would at least help you print, which an 8-pager, 5,000 copies, you're looking at about 5,000 to 6,000 Rand, depending on the deal that you have with the printer, whether it's Rising Sun or Novus or Caxton. All right, so obviously they've got different prices. So with that as well, you then factor in other things such as layout and design, etc. So it becomes actually okay for you to print. You're not going to run at a loss. You're not going to put more money in. You will just print because that ad came through. And that ad comes with a demand as well, in a sense of we need to let the people know in the community about what's going on. So that's where the demand for printing comes in, hence the irregular kind of printing. So may I please segue onto a different kind of conversation here, Paula, just for the sake of what we're talking about, especially, and I didn't know when actually I would have this opportunity to slot it in. I honestly do strongly feel that it actually struck me yesterday when Jenkins or Paul was here, and he kind of differentiated, gave us a clearer understanding what community newspaper is and he didn't mention, well, I don't know if you mentioned, it was gazetted that they shouldn't be using the word community, hence they changed to Caxton local newspapers. So now, I honestly, when I looked at it, I say, this commission is dealing with big tech that's in the US. And I strongly feel that here in South Africa, we should actually also be having a commission that deals with independently owned small community newspapers versus big media. Now, why I say this is because, and I'm bringing a total different element to this, is because historically, those community newspapers owned by the Caxtons, etc., were established during times where the township was not well serviced. People of color, publishers of color, or even communities were not well serviced. So in essence, newspapers that exist in suburbia help the economy of suburbia, because there's advertising in those community newspapers in Sandton worked to build the economy of Sandton, where in the township there is no establishment of newspapers, an example, to assist with the actual economy of the township, as an example. So which is why also when it comes to sustainability, we hardly will be getting any form of advertising regularly because of our irregular printing. because you need to be having what you call it, an ABC certificate or a verification of free distribution certificate, which is also something that is set by the agencies back when they were discussing we need to regulate advertising in South Africa, which benefits only the big media because they are the ones having the capital to actually sustain these things. Even the media buying, the actual value chain is disadvantaging these independent publishers because we don't own the printing press. The costs are determined by the printers for us to actually print with them, number one. Number two, we cannot speak to agencies to sell on our behalf. Okay? Now, what I mean by that is because if you don't have that ABC certificate and if you're not printing regularly, you're hardly going to get a ShopRite Checkers ad or an insert. You're hardly going to have any negotiation power. Number three, we also do not have the kind of resources in a sense of, putting the newspaper together, even if it's big. We don't have that. You need to, rent out Babaki, as an example, just to distribute a newspaper. So the big media in South Africa have benefited from the old regime. Okay? Now, I think this needs to be turned around, and maybe a separate conversation needs to be had. And I'm ventilating this, I'm airing this out, so that I give a kind of a picture to Google as well and Facebook to say, look, South Africa is not without any blemishes. We also have our own South African-based problems that we need to fix amongst each other. Okay, things like collusion, which was ruled here at the Competition Commission, which resulted to penalties being imposed to to big media about anti-competitive behavior. Yes, the Economic Development Fund was established and then was fumbled by MDDA. I'm talking now because I've consulted with most of the publishers that said even the outcomes of a commission ruling that resulted in hard money, it was fumbled. It did not reach the people that were affected by the anti-competitive behavior of the big media in South Africa because of the lack of understanding of this community media sector. So publications like Winelands Echo with Bushby as an example, they did not benefit from the Economic Development Fund, but yet they were the ones who played a pivotal role in fighting big media in South Africa. So I just thought I'd bring that kind of perspective and to say, like John Legend would say, love us with our imperfections. Google, we also have imperfections. So that's just a comment there. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, and I think, maybe just to say, Chris, that part of our terms of reference is to look at that competitive dynamic. And I think we were interested to hear from Professor Rasmus Nielsen as well around the concern that the current trajectory across most markets is just going to take winner take all on the big media, and some of the solutions being proposed might do the same anyway. So it's certainly up there in our mind, and it's something we want to develop more. So I'm glad you've raised it. I just wanted to pick up a couple of broad themes because, technically we're all out, more or less out of time, but I'm hoping you can give us an extra 10 minutes or so. But, the picture being painted is almost one that says, well, look, the law of economics, as you put it, Adam, is that the cost per click or cost per thousand online is far inferior to what you're seeing in print. And for community media in particular, you're not going to get the volumes to compensate for that necessarily in terms of impressions. So it does paint a kind of dire picture. And it's interesting that people's strategies, as Kate said, is go to non-profit so you can get, donor money, or go and put out a printed version so you can tap into that. So is there an answer, I suppose, is my question. Is there an outcome that is sustainable, or is this just too late?
I genuinely believe that there is an answer, or I wouldn't be here and doing what I do. I think I mean, my personal view, not necessarily that of AIP, would be that digital advertising is a bust flush for everyone. I mean, I don't think it's just AIP members that are not going to see returns on investment there. I think the challenge is that, going back to the 12 different ways you make revenue as a news organisation, that's fine in principle, but turning that into something that is practicable, that can be used by organisations, that takes time, it takes money, it takes investment. The news organisations we've seen who are AIP members who have been through that process, where they've received seed funding, where they've been able to raise grant funding, they are doing really, really well. It's a process that does work, but they need runway, they need space. I've done a lot of work with entrepreneurs outside the news business, and I think what we often fail to appreciate as journalists is that we're actually really similar to everybody else. You know, when it comes to building a business, when it comes to understanding my business model, I need space to try and fail at stuff. I need the resources to try something that isn't going to work, so I can find the thing that does. And that's where there's just nothing at the moment for most publishers within the independent media. And by independent, I mean the community media. Yeah.
Just related to that, I mean, we have heard from a number of community publications as well, though, you know, if you're in a township, there's not many advertisers because business is poor. Your consumers are low income, so membership might be difficult, paywall out of the question. So some of those don't seem as accessible depending on where you are. And in South Africa's context, it seems that it may be difficult to sustain, but give us your input, yeah.
I mean, obviously there is no one size fits all, but I mean, the best example I can think of, and it touches on what Chris was saying earlier, I mean, I've spoken to publishers who are working in townships and they see the potential value of producing, say, a local business directory. And they see the potential value of approaching local businesses and getting local businesses to advertise in that. And they see it might well be a future revenue earner. It might well be something that they could use to subsidise the journalism, the same as quality journalism is always subsidised from somewhere else. But again, it comes back to the question of, I can have that idea, but if I don't have the money and the skills and the resources to execute it, it's just an idea. And that is really the crux of me, where independent publishers are just not playing on the same playing field, never mind the level playing field, the access to that kind, to even the capital to start a township business directory, which, you know, one of the big publishers, they could pull from a different business unit if they wanted to do it. It's not there, but it's not a terrible idea by any stretch. But they need to experiment and figure out whether it's going to work.
And you mentioned the sort of robot.text and the difficulty, but I just want to come back to you, Kate. I mean, how much can be done at, let's say, an aggregated level or association level? Because, I mean, changing people's robots.text seems like something that almost could be rolled out for members. I think we had previously heard about the AIP looking to try and negotiate with advertisers because your collective readership is so large. But how much of some of these challenges can be done at the association or collective level versus, and even at a sub sort of association, maybe a region, versus having to individually train up and support? I mean, you may not be able to substitute some of the train up, but you could help in other ways, just get input.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that there's something very powerful about having an industry body, because I think that, you know, when you're dealing with individual, 200-odd publications, I mean, you are going to have huge costs. It's going to be logistically incredibly complicated, no matter what it is. I mean, if it's training around all of these particular tech skills, or if it's advertising. I mean, the collective power of having AIP, for instance, and if I use the advertising example, then, is huge. I mean, if a big corporate, say for instance, a boxer. a boxer knowing that they can get to just under 200 publications and put out all of those adverts. They go to one place, they place the advert, all the funding and the organizing of the financial side of things is done by the association. It suddenly becomes viable. Whereas if you're starting to talk about 100 little publications, so I think that's also something that AIP itself has been doing a lot of work on, is how do we ensure our collective power is utilized as much as possible. So on the advertising front, I mean, we do have co-ops, etc., that are looking at that. So AIP itself is not looking at that. But certainly on the training front, I mean, the history of AIP is to do huge amounts of training. And also, I mean, it was an interesting conversation that the three of us were having as we were waiting here. The thing is with that training is you have to do it again and again and again and again and again and again, because your members will leave and probably go to the mainstream media or leave the sector or whatever. But that's fine. I mean, those skills are important skills. We're happy to do that, but the funding is required in order to do that. But we can do it actually very cost effectively, and we can pull on these amazing people like Adam, like Chris, to come in and do that training for us. And we're building up, I think, over time, like an incredible pool of people with those kinds of skills. And in fact, the Sustainability Committee has been a fantastic project in terms of pulling all of these people together with a particular expertise in community media. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, just a quick one. May I add on the tech and skills side? If you look at the SUNF digitization drive and how we've built the sites, so we used WordPress, we used multi-sites. We're doing a strategy that if we update one thing, it updates all the sites, and also if there was some kind of, and also obviously the sites also need to be different from each other because we don't want to kind of duplicate things. And from a scale point of view, we've decided to look to when we onboard new publishers, we clone another site, and then we customize it. So things like adjusting or adjusting the kind of back-end capabilities. We've got a dev team that can do that, metadata, etc. So yeah, so the capability is there through the SUNF digitization drive, of which AIP also has a seat at. So it is possible to do it only if they are in our network. If they are having their own publications, it becomes a little bit tricky because a local graphic designer that knows how to build a website for just small business and not necessarily understanding what needs to be put in from a publisher point of view, things like categories, things like metadata, adjusting those things, it's not going to be there. But AIP can, if there are resources, kind of bring all those people in and consolidate them into a system that, or a model that's already working. So it is possible to assist.
I promise I'll be very quick. Just another very practical example of that. I think last Monday we were talking about Google's search results and the position on a search engine results page where the rich results come. The people also ask question. And one of the comments was that this is AI generated. That's not true. There is machine learning employed to pull that text from websites, but the bot goes out and looks for websites with questions in headlines to see what the answers to those texts are. It's not generative AI in the same sense. Now, as a news publisher, you can optimize for being in that space. I can put little bits of code all over my page that says, this is a question, this is an answer, and the more I do that, the more chance I have of appearing in that particular part of search results. But that's not something you can necessarily completely centralize. Site editors have got to take the responsibility to do that day to day on 2 or 3 articles a day and so on. So there's kind of limitations in the shared service model, I think, for stuff like
that. Maybe just to pick up that search engine optimization, I mean, you mentioned that there's a lot of companies working on this, but they're working for those who have money or want to sell. But Google will tell us that they also put out stuff on what helps drive traffic, and they have Google News Initiative. They have all these initiatives with publishers. So I was just surprised that the SEO knowledge for publishers you're telling us is weak. If Google's investing in the news industry and it also has its own SEO, so maybe help us out there.
certainly from the point of view of a small independent publisher with maybe a couple of employees, it's a question of resources. Every hour I spend researching the latest changes to the Google algorithm, every hour I spend looking back over 15 years of search engine history, of attending workshops on how to optimize SEO, is an hour less I'm doing the journalism, which is what is motivating, which is why I'm there. And there's a very big element of unknown unknowns in it. If I don't know where to find that information, I don't have that information. It's not publishers being lazy. It's not intuitive. When you're presented with the back end of WordPress, you're presented with a screen that says, enter your story here, enter your pictures here, enter your headline here, and we'll do a little bit of SEO for you, job done. But actually to really compete, to really build audiences, it's a lot more sophisticated than that. But where do you find the first? Where do you find out that you need this knowledge in the first place? Yes, Google publishes information around SEO, but it's not transparent. It's generally written for very technical people with a good understanding of how the web works, and you have to stay abreast of it, checking in daily on websites like Search Engine Roundtable, for example.
On that as well, the issue of language, in indigenous languages as well. So it's not even featuring at all. So yes, we might have Google News initiatives, but it's for English-speaking people. So there's exclusion of the bulk of, you saw the stats of AIP members. So it's a non-starter, and even if it starts, it then needs to have some kind of runway and kind of an optimistic timeline to say we can get this done, but then also the issue of the dynamics of a newsroom or publication. There's also churn there as well. So you might be an old publisher, sorry to use the word old, but you might be a publisher that's been publishing for a long time. You started this newspaper. You don't have the energy to kind of now go into Google News Initiative. So you'll send someone that you just brought in. That person is also something called churn in the newsroom as well. So they might come in next time they get a job at a PR agency. They're gone. That kind of training is gone. So so those are the kind of things that we have to consider as well, that there's churn, a staff churn, and also just the language issue as well.
And just to follow up on that very, very excellent point, there is nowhere in the Google documentation that points out the vast majority of news content is not SEOable anyway. I can't search for a news story I don't know about. It's not a user action. There is a very small amount of content that a site will produce that it is worth investing the time and effort into discoverability on. But again, that's a strategic decision. That's a resource-based decision to make. You know, what language is this published in? If I'm a multi-language site, should I be publishing in different languages for different purposes? It's very, very complex to, yeah.
Try be brief and wrap up in the next 5-6 minutes. I just wanted to go back to a question I asked to Independent and Isolezwe, which is, you know, you invest in a website seemingly because you want to direct traffic there, because you can monetize there, partly because you can't monetize anywhere else. I mean, we hear about ability to monetize on social media, and you hear about influencers and others doing it. I mean, why is there such a difficulty in monetizing on social media? So investing in a Facebook page for the sake of a Facebook page to monetize. And I was interested, Kate, in your stats where more of your members have Facebook pages than websites. And I think it came up, and it may have even been through Chris, that trying to maintain both can be a challenge. But if there was more option to monetize on Facebook, would that help?
I think this is a point of existential crisis for some of our publishers now. I mean, the publishers who do have big Facebook pages, and I won't name names, but we were talking about this the other day, they are seeing big drops in traffic because Facebook is deprioritizing news. Facebook has explicitly said we are going to take news out of your feed. It started in response to the 2016 presidential election in the US and accusations of Facebook carrying misinformation and disinformation. And their reaction then was, well, news is too much of a hassle. We're just going to start easing it out of the feed. We get blamed when news gets it wrong, so we're just not going to carry news. It's been accelerated by their decision to pull news in regions like Canada, where financial penalty is the right word, but where a financial tax has been put on them for carrying news. They've decided not to do it. So the general received wisdom, I think this is the big question for me for community media. Generally, across the news industry, the received wisdom is that we want to get people off of the platforms onto our sites where we can address them individually, where we can collect our own first-party analytics, where we can understand the audience we are building without filter. That's really, really hard in a community publishing, where most access is through subsidized services that the networks will bundle, which is Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp. It's not the open internet. And I think this is, it's a huge question to unpick, but my advice would not necessarily be build an audience on Facebook if you want to be sustainable in 10 years' time.
And I suppose they are, in a sense, competitors for community building, because that's what they're trying to do. Sometimes it's around interest, not necessarily community links. But the last thing I just wanted to cover were two things. The one is we heard from large media. I mean, even they have trouble getting hold of people from Google, Facebook. Google told us, well, they've now appointed one person to help with that. I mean, can we just understand the challenge? I mean, it seems obvious the challenge is much greater, but would more people available from these organizations to assist make a difference?
My sense is it would, actually. I mean, to have more people on the ground would definitely make a difference. And I think that's one of the big problems with the platforms, is that there's just no people. I mean, it's like they have decided that, somehow or other you've got to basically contend with this all online. And when you haven't got those skills, it's extremely difficult. But I mean, I'd love my team to also comment on that. But I think it would make a difference.
Any resources, whether it's human capital on the ground, access, yes, it will help. But I also want to emphasize that the publishers that we represent, and I think the numbers also speak to this. They're very small when it comes to having websites. Number one, number two, they're also at the very infant stage of this digital journey. So with that as well, we need to be treated with kids' gloves in a sense of more training, more access to maybe Google Initiative, Google News Initiative, GNI. So yes, if we have access to them, and if they can dumb down what they share with us, speak in language that we understand, because we are at the infant stage. Us, with this digitization drive, as an example, we are actually more advanced than where they are. Therefore, we have to always try dumb down what we share with them. So that needs to be also need to be taken into consideration with whoever they appoint, that you need to be speaking the layman's in order to help whatever query arises. I'm sorry, just the last thing. If a news website gets developed, it's not necessarily developed in-house. Sometimes it's developed by a graphic designer, and then that graphic designer gives you a quick crash course on how to load an article, and then they're gone. All right, after they're getting the last 50% deposit, they're gone, okay? And at times, you have publishers as well who had news websites, and then just they can't really access it anymore because it's gone. Even the domain was not renewed because it was not invested. So those are kind of elements, things that we experience, and we try to revive and try to help here and there. And also the kind of who would then go to Google to ask for assistance in something. Is it the graphic designer, or is it the newsroom? I mean, is it the owner? So are you're gonna pay money for that graphic designer to go fix something? So now you're gonna have to put money out to give to that person to go fix something that, and then you're not gonna be invested. So I think that's something that needs to be, considered as well. That the newsroom, the newspapers themselves are not building these websites; they use the third party, and also on ad serving as well. So some of them that we've seen, they even come to us recently. They say, look, Chris, we were not part of the digitization drive. Can you please help us put ads on our website? So those are not just kind of ads using, the kind of the link to an ad server. These are literally putting the PNG or a GIF that animates and then clicking through. Then there's also the concept of, if you do that, how do you measure the performance of that particular ad unit, as an example? That's why we MacGyver, by using some guerrilla tactics, by using Bitly links and using that as a kind of a Bitly link analytics to measure the click-through, and then we overlay that with the page impression on that particular article, just to give report.
All right, my last question, then I must let you go. You've talked a lot about training, tech skills. Is that enough, or is increased visibility, discoverability an essential component as well?
I mean, I think one of the interesting conversations we have in the Sustainability Committee at the moment is that these are still areas that we're trying to formulate AIP policy around. What do we think the right solutions should be at that level? I mean, speaking personally, news has never been discoverable. I mean, news has always been discoverable via other means. Television news, the golden age of television broadcasting, was because the licenses required television broadcasters to carry the 10, 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock bulletin. I don't see any reason why the same logic shouldn't apply to platform publishing. News is a societal good. Its value far outweighs the financial transaction that can be generated from it, and it should be recognised as such and have that kind of prominence.
Just a parting shot within this community media space. Look, I think I deal with community radio stations and newspapers, right? So one thing I've just done a quick dipstick kind of look into things, and some publishers have told me that, Chris, some community radio stations just read my news. All right? So there's that dynamic as well, that radio stations are just picking up a newspaper and reading and not crediting. One in particular, I think you interviewed him here from Newcastle. He sent me a WhatsApp saying, Chris, a local radio station wants to talk about, a deal. How should I structure it? And I said, well, look, you know what, you can work on a barter deal kind of concept as space for physical space in the paper. And also if they can just credit traveling around, how do we strike deals with radio stations, etc. And some of them it's copyright infringement, or we wrote that article, we put the people to interview the people, and you're reading it on the radio station, on the community radio station. And one question, maybe if there are any other radio stations that are going to come through, maybe you should ask, how many people are in your newsroom? I'm not talking to a presenter, talking to an interview. How many people are in your newsroom? So I'm just I don't want to open up scabs here, but those are the kind of things that we need to also look into. Housekeeping here in South Africa as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and that raises other questions around just also, can you collaborate? Can you do win-win together? But yeah, thank you, Kate and Adam and Chris, for coming through and for the insights you've given. I mean, I definitely think there's different levels of media that have to play a role in this inquiry, and the solutions may be very different, and the problems are very different, and their interface with the platforms very different. So I think it's helped, certainly, and as you've highlighted, Kate, the diversity of voice that's coming from community as opposed to mainstream means the contribution, I think, to South Africa is huge. Absolutely. I mean, for that, we end off the second week, and we'll be back on Monday at 2 p.m. We've just got an afternoon session. Tuesday, we'll run morning through evening, and then Wednesday, a full day as well. Thank you very much.